Thank you always, Laura, for herding us cats. Welcome everyone to Public Health and Safety Committee meeting. It is January 10, and yes, you are in 2023. We have allocated extra time today due to the substantive, the heaviness, the weight of these items. So you're welcome for this opportunity to be together from 8 to 10 today. I'm gonna call this meeting to order. Our committee members are present. I see Angela, I see Peter, and I see myself. And we have a full screen of amazing people. Thank you all for joining us today. Are there any changes to the agenda before we get going? Seeing no facial expressions, we'll keep going. Are there any additions to the agenda? I know in the past, Angela and Peter, things have come up. Is there anything that you would like to discuss in item number 6 for additional items today?
I don't have anything to discuss.
Thank you. Angela, how about you?
Negative.
All right, thank you both. All right, let's jump into item number 3, ordinance number 2023-001, update to Tumwater Municipal Code, Title 9, Criminal Code. Karen Kirkpatrick, lovely to see your face.
Good morning. Nice to see you too, and happy 2023. This is not one of your weighty matters for the morning, hopefully. This is rather routine, although we haven't done it since 2016, but this is an update to the city's criminal code. Basically, I haven't really prepared a formal presentation for you this morning, but I'm available to try and answer any questions if you have them. Basically, what we've done is incorporate the new statutes into our municipal code and delete those that have gone away or been moved to other locations within the state statute. I believe that you have received a list. I know sometimes it's hard to read the strikeout underline version. So I believe you received a list of all the new statutes, as well as a list of the deleted statutes that showed what happened to those, so that typically they don't completely go away. They've been modified in some manner. And so this is just to bring our city up to date with what the legislature's been doing over the past few years and make it easier for our police officers and make us consistent with what the other jurisdictions in the county, help the county prosecutor out and be consistent there with what others are doing. And with that, I'm happy to try and answer questions if you have any.
Angela, Peter, did you have any questions for Karen?
Yes. Karen, when was this comprehensive list sent out?
Oh, I believe it was.
It's in your packet,
Thursday.
Angela.
Okay.
It came as a separate email, Angela, to you from me. It was just to the committee members, not part of the official packet.
And we can resend that if you'd like us to.
No, I'll do a search because
Well, now
after
I'm
the holiday.
confused.
So you should have received a separate email from me either Thursday afternoon or Friday. I apologize, I can't remember what day. But it was it's 2 charts. It's one that has the additions to the code and one that has the deletions to the code with the explanations of where those went.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
If you search your email for my name, it might be easier to find.
Peter, did you have any additional questions besides Angela's?
No, I don't.
I have one more. So what are the major changes? Just 2 major changes that you would like to highlight. Are there any?
Well, I think the biggest change is that with this whole police overhaul, a lot of things have been moved around within the statutes. And so I think you'll just see changes there. I think, and substantively, that's the biggest.
Angela, anything else? Or are you good? So Karen, this is just housekeeping. This is things we have to do with all of our other codes, right? To align with the state. So nothing new that we're developing. We're just, okay.
No, and in response to Councilmember Jefferson, the other thing is restraining orders. They've all been consolidated. So that's another big rearrangement that you'd see within the state statute and our code. And as to your question, no, this is pretty much just keeping us up to date with what the state legislature is doing. We do have a catch-all provision within the code, so that as things change, we can still charge the new violate the new offenses, but we like to instead have them each detailed as much as possible, and we should probably be doing this more often than every 7 years or what have you, but we'll get there.
Right. Thank you, Karen. So Angela and Peter, we do have to take action on this item to place ordinance number 2023-001 on the January 17th, 2023 City Council agenda with recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign. I am looking for a motion.
Before we do that, may I ask Charlene to please make copies of the addition and deletion? I saw the email, but it was kind of difficult going back and forth from the addition to the deletion in electronic fashion using this device. If she can make a copy of this and put in our box.
Peter, you're asking for a hard copy for yourself.
Yes, for me, yes.
Yes, we can make sure that there's a copy in your box.
Thank
And
you.
Angela and Leanna, would you like hard copies as well, or just Peter?
I'm good.
Angela,
Angela's-
is that good, or you would like hard copy?
I would like a hard copy too, please.
Okay.
All right. Thank you both. Thank you, Charlene, for doing that. So I'm still looking for a motion from one of you and a second from the other.
So moved. This is Angela.
Second,
Thank you. Any further discussion on these housekeeping items? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
aye.
Aye. Thank you. Motion
Aye.
has passed. Karen, there you go.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Item number 4, Code Enforcement Program Update. Chief, what do you got for us?
Thank you, Councilmember Dolph. As you're aware, January is our dedicated month to provide the yearly overview of the code enforcement program the police department has, and Lieutenant Ken Driver is here to present that presentation to you. Lieutenant Driver.
Good morning. I'll see if I can share my screen this morning real quick. Would that work? So I'm not going to take up too much of your time this morning, but a couple of things I'm going to cover are our program goals, what our complaint process looks like, some of our statistics from last year, and then a few updates on some code enforcement cases. So our program goals, obviously, we want to resolve our violations through education and VCAs, which are voluntary correction agreements. We always try to strive to work with our violators in getting agreements done and signed, and we do that through education and frequent contacts with the community. The other one is improving communication and collaboration with other city departments. We work a lot with our other city departments and enforcing these violations and trying to resolve them. And a lot of that comes with our good communication with the other departments within the city. And obviously fostering positive relationships within our community that helps us resolve these issues. And we're always looking to find other entities to help us maybe resolve cases with where my light just turned off, but resolve cases through where maybe some violators can't or don't have the resources to solve their problems, like maintaining their lawns or getting rid of garbage. We're always looking for other programs to help us come in and do that on a voluntary basis. Officer Long has done a great job of maintaining contacts throughout the year. So, but we're always looking for more to add to that list. And then one of the goals was obviously Officer Rutledge retired this last July. And one of our goals was to find his replacement. His replacement will start next week. So hopefully we'll get that person up and rolling so we can continue to make a positive impact. The code enforcement process, obviously, the first thing is how complaints are received, and that's done through a complaint through other city departments or our code enforcement officers observing a violation or through a complaint through the community. The next step that we would do is we would send a courtesy letter to that person after we have done an inspection of the property to see if there was a violation. We send a courtesy letter to the owner. A lot of times our investigations are resolved through the letter and the owner becoming aware of the problem and fixing the problem. After we send the letter, we obviously do another inspection of the property. And then if nothing's changed, we might move to the notice of violation, send the violation, and then do another inspection upon that. So in 2022, we had 54 violations. That was just a little less than in 2021. As you can see on the chart here, the 25%, that's the other category. That's made up of maybe 7 or 8 different categories, such as cluttered sidewalks in front of businesses, animal complaints, foul odors, illegal signs. Those complaints, we maybe get 1 or 2 of those a year. I just put those in one. The majority of our investigations are for overgrown vegetation, abandoned vehicles, and garbage in front of residents or businesses. Most of the time, we're able to resolve most of those through voluntary correction agreements or just sending out letters and them becoming aware of the violations and they take care of the problem. But most of those throughout the year have been resolved. A couple investigative things. I'll just highlight the brewery and then the property on our 54th. We've been dealing with these 2 properties for years now, but I talked to Officer Long yesterday about these. In reference to the brewery, we're still getting overgrown vegetation. Sometimes the fencing is down. We get graffiti here and there. We try to report those to the owner as soon as we can to get those fixed. Currently, according to Officer Long, community development is working on a correction agreement with the owner, trying to get that signed to see if we can get some of that moving forward. So again, though, that might take some time. The property on 54th Avenue, mainly those are, again, are junk vehicles, RVs, trash, and multiple people living in travel trailers or different types of homes on that property. Some of the problems we've had in the past is the owner is uncooperative with us, so it's hard to work with. According to Officer Long, though, he contacted his attorney at the end of December, and they're working on trying to figure out how to evict some of those people from the property. So, you know, fingers crossed, hopefully with this next year, we get movement on some of that stuff, and that'll clear up some of that. But that about covers our 2022 stuff, unless anyone had any questions.
Angela and Peter, do you have any questions for Lieutenant Driver?
No question.
I have none.
Lieutenant Driver, I just had like an informational question. So every once in a while when I'm walking my dog, I get people like, what about this? What about this? Do you like, sometimes I feel like the complaint is actually not about the issue, but it's like a personality thing with the neighbor. Does that come into play with your officer going out? Like, is that part of the process of like the letter and getting to feel what's really going on? How do you deal with those nuances?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, when we get a complaint, they'll respond out there and actually verify if it's a complaint or not. They do try to resolve them usually without sending a courtesy letter. The courtesy letters are if we can't contact somebody, we'll send that out, or there's really no way to contact them. But if it's something where we can go make personal contact and try to resolve that, especially between conflicts between neighbors, sometimes it's just explaining the process and educating them on that, and that that resolves it, but we try to make personal contact first to see if we can resolve it.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I
Now
see
have a
Angela
question.
unmuting.
Yes, now I have a question. What about abandoned vehicles? Let's say where you're ignored and the vehicle is just on the road. What happens? Is it eventually towed? Is it just staying there dilapidated?
Well, if
For
it's on,
years.
if it's on private property, that's the owner of the property's responsibility to tow and maintain their property. If it's on city right of way, there's certain things we can do depending on how long it's been parked there. If we can determine it's abandoned and it doesn't belong to anybody, we'll just tow those. But if they belong to somebody, we'll explain the process and if they can keep it parked there. There's a lot of different factors that are involved in that, but sometimes we'll mark the tires, make sure it's moving. If it doesn't move, then they have a certain amount of time they got to get it out of there before we tow it or fines are levied on them.
Okay, because I've noticed that there's 2 vehicles that were there for years and they're finally gone. So good job to that. Thank you.
Thank you for that discussion, Lieutenant Driver. I think we're good. There's no action to be taken from this. Okay, item number 5, Tumwater Police Department Strategic Staffing Plan 2023 to 2028. I feel
Great.
like there's going to be some questions on this one.
Yeah, well, we have quite the presentation for you, so we'll get into that. You know, the city council for the 23-24 year set a priority for the police department to develop a police master plan. This also happened to coincide with our hire of a police management analyst in March of 2022. Dr. Oliver Bowers is a published criminal justice researcher and considered an expert in the analysis of criminal justice practices. At the time of his hire, and to this day, Dr. Bowers' operating principle in support of our command staff is to tell us what we don't know. What that means is he's encouraged and we expect him to challenge any and all of our practices. So with that being said, the development of any law enforcement master plan revolves around staffing. You know, staffing was already on the command staff priority list due to the many reaching impacts of COVID, the police reform legislation, you know, city population and commercial growth, and the expected attrition in our police department over the next 5 years, which you saw in the outline. As such, we approached Dr. Bowers and tasked him with developing a staffing model that is applicable to our community, as there is no recognized singular or standardized model. Dr. Bowers is going to walk the committee through the evaluation process and development of this model, which ultimately resulted in the strategic staffing plan you have in front of you. This plan was also submitted with the 23-24 budget process back in June. The goal for today is really just to start a discussion to ensure the committee understands the varying factors involved in the staffing model and to seek any clarification and to get your input. We will next then come back to the committee with monetary costs and alternatives to maintain those levels of services to our community. Ultimately, this will all lead to defining the police master plan. I'm going to turn this over now to Dr. Bowers. He'll lead you through it. And then City Administrator Doan's going to play cleanup at the end. So Dr. Bowers.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me well enough. Okay, so I am going to share my screen and take you through the presentation. I've reorganized the models for the presentation so we can go through it step by step so you can understand how it was built, but also why it was built, which I think is a fundamental component of this. And before we do that, I kind of want to address, as the chief had said, kind of in my role, I am the department analyst, but ostensibly I am an academic researcher, and that is what I've always done. I've been a policing scholar for nearly a decade now, which is terrifying. My doctorate is in criminology and criminal justice, but I've published in both qualitative and quantitative research, and I've been published in peer-reviewed journals all over the world. But I specialize in advanced methodologies and the application of evidence-based practice. And the reason I'm telling you this is so that you can appreciate that this model is a fully evidence-based model that I went through step by step. This is so many research articles, publications, government reports, DOJ, COPS, like absolutely everything went into this model. And as you're going to see, like there's going to be a lot of information, but I'm going to try and break it down as carefully as possible so you can understand every single stage as we go through it. If I can share my screen, which we will try next. Oh, it's gone. Okay, can everyone see the presentation okay? Okay, so, perfect. So the first thing we have, which is the same thing as in the original report, is a breakdown effectively of 2001 to 2022. This is just to address some of the notable increases and changes that we've seen over the last 20 years, 21 years now. Population in Tumwater officially increased from around 12,000 to around 26,000, which is a substantive increase, especially when looking at something like departmental staffing. Calls for service increases. It's around 40 to 50%, but this fluctuated significantly because of things like COVID. But the trend analysis that I ran on calls for service does show that the distinctive arc is heading upwards. So there is a notable year-on-year increase, just generally speaking. Staffing increase from 23 commission officers in 2001 to 33 in 2022. However, no increases to staffing since 2010 outside of the city annexation in 2016 with the one SRO added by contract with school district. The reason this is significant is because the department frequently operates below the authorized level of 33, primarily because of departmental components like training, leave, light duty. There are myriad factors, but the key to this is that while the authorized level is 33, we are consistently below that simply because we cannot have every single officer working every single day to get full coverage. So adjustments have to be made throughout. Complications to this include, as the chief mentioned, upcoming retirements, what I've politely referred to as hiring complexities, and supervisory considerations, which the department prides itself on supervision and brilliant leadership amongst its department members. And this kind of all factors into the structure of the department. So, the Department of Justice recognizes 4 evidence-based approaches to staffing models. These are the 4, and I'm going to go through them just so you understand kind of how they work. Historically, though, police staffing has always been done based on historical precedent and has typically had no empirical basis whatsoever. It's only really in the past few years of policing research that the evidence-based policies have started to push over into police departments. It is also worth mentioning at this point that there is no national standard for police staffing. There are national averages, but there is no national standard. And this is something that we're well aware of, which is why we have to build models such as this. The use of things like calls for service, per capita response times, those kind of things, they are heavily discouraged. They're not evidence-based, they're not reliable, and they're not appropriate, which is why we get into issues with the department not being comparable to a lot of regional departments, a lot of similarly sized departments, which I'll talk about in a minute. So when you look at things like similarly sized cities, they will have different staffing needs based on all the different components, such as population types, policing styles, the needs of the city. And fundamentally, that's why you take a city with exactly the same population as Tumwater, their policing needs will likely be very different. Even within the same county, they can be different. Same state, wildly different, different state, it gets out of control. So the key to these processes is to build a model which is specifically for the city of Tumwater. And the model like this, ideally, is evidence-based and reflects everything we've learned in 30 or 40 years of policing research. We will talk about each of these approaches. But the key to this really is using analysts, academic research, and these intuitive processes which have, been created for this purpose so that staffing models reflect the city which they serve. So the first model is the per capita model. Many departments across the country use this. It is an incredibly simple method to determine staffing. However, police leadership bodies, the Department of Justice, everyone recommends against using this. The main reason that a lot of departments use this is they don't have the ability to engage in the complex data analysis or consulting of which that would allow you to avoid this effect. This is where you get a lot of the national averages from. It just creates a number, which is an arbitrary comparison between cities and departments. It doesn't really do anything. So
Also, Oliver, also add on that, the other reason it's often used is it's easy for the community to understand because it's very simple, one-to-one.
yeah. So this model is often relied upon, but that is inherently problematic.
I have a question. So is this staffing model the one we are using now in Tumwater?
Honestly, we don't use a staffing model. This is something we refer to for years, but we really have never employed a staffing model. And that's why when we started this process, we tasked Oliver with creating a staffing model that we can actually put into a master plan. And is why we're bringing it to you today to have your input on that model.
As along with that, many departments don't really have a functioning model because they don't have the ability to create one. So there are other components which we'll talk about in a minute, which is effectively just they keep tucking along, they keep using national averages, and they keep referring to it as they go, just keeps on working. The next approach is the minimum staffing. This is one of the most common approaches. The primary component of this is resource availability, city management. But this is about effectively keeping the department at that minimum acceptable level. That's really what it is. There's no objective component. This is often perceived as optimal staffing, but it's not. This is about minimum staffing. So for something like this is something we have to deal with in the department here significantly, is that management have to actively monitor and counter factors, things like vacation, sick leaves, light duty, training, in order to maintain the effectiveness of the department. And this is why I was saying earlier that we may have the authorized level of 33 officers, but we're consistently below it because we have officers who are out doing different things, like the extent of the training they do. We have officers who go on vacation, we have light duty, we have all of these different things which factor in to how many officers are available on any given day to police the city. And given that TPD is focused on public and officer safety, having enough officers available, is paramount. Like, that's the key to all of this. The next approach is the authorized level approach. This is just an artificial benchmark. This is realistically how many police officers the department can afford. Ideally, you should staff above the authorized level so that when you have to deal with things like training, light duty, everything else that I keep mentioning, you still have enough officers to adequately support the department and the city. These operational factors are really important because we want officers to be, doing training. We want them to actually be able to, recuperate if they get injured, but you need to have enough officers to staff a department to balance that out. The Department of Justice recommends that this level be increased at a rate commensurate with relevant factors as part of the long-term strategic planning. So this is something we are mindful of in terms of kind of keeping things moving upwards, because maintaining the bare minimum is inherently problematic. The final model is the workload approach. This is the most comprehensive approach to staffing that exists. This is based on the demand for service and systematic analyses which account for things like service style, characteristics of the city, characteristics of the agency. This involves complex modeling and a thorough mixed methodological exploration of the various factors involved. This is my model, effectively, well, the basis of it. So the International Association of Chiefs of Police helped develop a formula for this kind of modeling, but as with everything else, it's typically based on national averages and these kind of arbitrary benchmark figures, which aren't entirely helpful, which I'll talk about in a minute. However, this foundation has been used across the country in almost every state, in cities across the world as well. And policing researchers and kind of overseeing bodies, they strongly advocate this type of approach because it relies on actual levels of demand, but also matches that demand with the supply of the police resources and then models them within the specific context of the city. So the thing I want to keep pushing today is that this model was built for Tumwater. Every part of it was built based on the needs of this city and the needs of the department and how everything fluctuates together. This isn't just, we'll use someone else's number and apply it to our department. So the final component for this, which I will just briefly mention, is that there was a brilliant quote with one of the reports on this that said that this approach requires a complex data analysis beyond the capacity of many police departments, but it nonetheless offers the most accurate and reliable predictor of police staffing levels. Specifically, this is what I was hired for, to be able to do these kinds of analysis. And this is what a lot of departments don't have. So they usually have to bring in outside people to do it. So the model that I built is entirely bespoke, but it's based on existing research and the existing formulas, but using our data and our information. It is built around our own data, our own service style, characteristics of the city and department. And I used a lot of data to build it. I didn't just pick a single year. I looked at all trend data going back to 2013, and I mapped absolutely everything out for that purpose. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to briefly just go through the model as it is, so you understand how I built it. That's backwards. There we go.
Let's stop there really quick and see if based on the models, if the council members have any questions on those models before we go further.
So I have a question. My question is not necessarily on the model, but my question is the assumptions that drive that model. So you said that in 2021, Tumwater's population was 26,000, give or take. So I went on the web and found that the population in 2011 was 25, 28. And the reason I did that because I wanted to find out what was the 5-year increases in the population. So I'm assuming that's what drove your assumption, right? So, okay, so I found that in 2011, the population was 20,528. And 2021, it was 25,844. And the rate of increase in that 10-year interval is 5,316. So I did trending to 2026, and my math tells me that our population in Tumwater will be 31,160. So now I do agree that there is a rate of increase that is significant. So the question is, do you have a model that actually compare, or let me take that back. How do you compare the rate of increase with additional policing that we need?
Put simply, we don't. That is precisely why using the population to model staffing is so inherently problematic. And that's why that kind of modeling is not being used. Those models are the most common evidence-based ones, and they are inherently problematic. But as you'll see in a minute when we go through my model, that is not a relative factor in building this staffing model, because the fluctuations of city population, they're a component, but they are not a basis for the data, if that makes sense.
Okay.
For precisely the reason that you said, because that modeling is so problematic and you can anticipate growth. And like I said, I was looking at the trend analysis, but as we'll see in a minute, there are many complicating factors to do with it. which is why just using something like the population to establish how many police officers you have is highly, it's not recommended as a way to do police staffing.
So
Doc,
then, if your assumption is based upon the national averages, then that begs the question: are you doing the comparison of Tumwater with a sizable community, or are you just primarily just going by a statistical model that predict that there should be more officers?
Oh, no, we're not comparing Tumwater to any other jurisdictions. That's the point of the model, is that you cannot compare. Every model has to be entirely bespoke for the city.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Doc, just real quick, and Doc Bauer's model is going to take into many factors that are uniquely Tumwater. And I use this example fairly regularly when we talk to community groups about staffing models, because they want to know about staffing. And, you know, for example, the city of Tukwila has a population right around 22,000 people. But obviously, Tukwila has a massive retail commercial core. Their police department is probably 4 times our size for a nighttime population less than Tumwater. So, you know, you can't, that's why, you know, the model you will see, and the doc will get into this in a little bit, takes into the Tumwater factors, as we call them, and not just, you know, if you start comparing, you know, just Tumwater to other cities, you're going to get lost, because nothing has, you know, what Tumwater has, and, you know, for good and bad. So I think that a lot of Councilmember Agabi's questions or concerns or, you know, thoughts will be addressed as Doc gets into this next step.
Thank you. My questions was, so in statistics, you have to have some kind of comparison if you're doing modeling. So why is it yet to present its assumption? I am hoping that its assumption will be grounded in statistics. Either it's chi-square, you go in modeling, you go in trending. So I mean, I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Dr. Bowers.
Okay. Okay, so the formula itself, which is built on established evidence-based principles and other components, it's a multi-step process, which I'm going to take you through very carefully, and I'm not going to go into too much depth because it gets incredibly muddy, but so you can understand how the model is built, I'll go through it step by step. So the first thing we use in the model is calls for service data. This is a very simple component just to assess the workload of the department. This is modeled out year on year to look at averages, trends, and work out, you know, the most appropriate numbers. There isn't really any, you know, future assumptioning in this. This is done on actual bell curves and modeling so that we know this is precisely, you know, where our calls for service were. This was also averaged out across periods and then kind of checked and rechecked to see where that model landed in terms of accuracy. So this one took some doing. This then gets multiplied by the number of calls, the total number of calls by the average time it takes an officer to be involved with a call. This was a huge component of this model. There is a generally accepted assumption nationally that the average time for an officer to be involved in a call is 45 minutes. And this is hugely problematic because no two departments are the same. And the way that Tumwater Police Department operates is not the same as other departments. Some departments have, you know, report writing divisions, they have investigative decisions. Our patrol officers do everything themselves. And the generally accepted 45 minutes is inherently problematic. Our officers, they do their own report writing, they do their own evidence processing, but also we have, you know, transport, we have logistical components, and the most significant component as well is this false multiplier, which is whenever an officer is engaging, you know, physically with a person, we have contact and cover, so there's always an additional officer present usually more than one. Well, that means they are involved in that same call as well. So it's not just the time of one officer spent at a call, it's the additional officers that are there as well, which multiplies that number. So this gets built into this model. All the data is triangulated with the officers so we can accurately determine the amount of time that an officer spends on average on a call. However, to break this down, what I did is I broke it down into the bare minimum type of call for one officer and the bare minimum type of call for multiple officers. So the bare minimum call, simple phone call, follow-up is about 15 minutes. This is a call that has no follow-up beyond that. Nothing else happens. It is just a call. It is taken care of about 15 minutes. One of the examples that I used in the original paper about this was that a simple shoplifting incident involving the arrest of a single suspect and the presence of only 2 officers involved a total of 5.5 hours of officer time. So this is where you get problems with that generally accepted average, because the difference between 15 minutes and 5.5 hours is huge. So what I did is I broke down all of those components and worked out that on the lowest end of the average call duration, which is nearly 70% of all calls, we can assume everything is the bare minimum. We're looking at that about 15 minutes. And then if we assume that all of the other calls that required multiple officers, so the other 30% were the most minimal that they could be, all of that rounds up together. And like I said, these are all working on the bare minimum possibilities. The average call duration was 80 minutes, 80.4 officially. So this is where you can see that generally accepted national average of 45 minutes does not apply in Tumwater because of the work that our officers do, because of the way we cover our officers, because of all of the different jobs that they do within their role. The average that we have is about 80 minutes. Then we get it into what we call the proactive time buffer. The goal of community policing is for officers to spend ideally 66% of their time being proactive, not reactive. So reactive would just be responding to calls consistently. So you get a call, you go respond to it, you deal with it. You get another call, you respond, you go deal with it. Community policing, as a benchmark, this goal is you are out in the community, you are engaging, you are actively trying to solve problems before they become, bigger problems. Before, this is, trying to balance up the needs of the community. The goal here is 66%. The City of Tumwater usually hovers around 45 to 50%. We would like to push that up to 60. That's the goal. But the proactive time buffer for strategic planning purposes is this gold standard in policing research of 66%. The next step is the number of hours necessary to staff a single officer per year, which 10-hour shift, so 10 hours, 365 days, so 3,650 hours for the year. Then this step has to then be adjusted because you have department benefits, vacation, leave, training, light duty, all this, which results in a determination of how many officers are required to fill one patrol element for a whole year, which is 2.2 officers. So for every one patrol element, we need 2.2 people to cover it for an entire year. So you imagine like one person's on, one person's off, and then you have to factor leave and everything else. So just over 2 people. When you put this whole model together, which this isn't working again. There we go. The result of the formula, based on everything put together, is 40.75. Meaning that based on this model, 41 officers are needed to appropriately staff the City of Tumwater, based on all of the components that we deal with in the city. So this is our data, our policing style, our operational structure, and every component that exists within the city. This is the number.
And
But
that is,
sorry, Chief.
Dr. Bowers, that is as of today.
As of today, I ran the model again.
Okay.
And I will stress that every part of this model that I built was done based on a minimum operating number. So like a bare minimum. So if we were assuming that 70% of the calls that our officers deal with are just a phone call follow-up that lasted 15 minutes, and every 2 officer call was the bare minimum, not involving an arrest and transfer everything. I did everything based on minimum numbers. And this is the model where it stands.
Dr. Bowers, quick question. Did
Yes.
you, I mean, is it easy that you have this established to do like then the other end of the spectrum, right? This is the bare minimum, the ideal, or, is there a range? I know this is your bare, but did you run numbers of moving?
Yes and no. The problem with figuring out the ideal is it's based on kind of future data.
Right.
This would be that kind of like appropriate, I don't say middle ground, but this is the number which gives us everything that the department currently needs as it stands, and taking into account that element of future growth until, what do we say, 2028, whatever that period is. This takes into account as much of that as possible. Beyond that wiggle room, if I increase the data ranges in it, I mean, yeah, it pushed it up to about 50 when I ran that model.
I think this is interesting for Angela and Peter and the rest of our council members to hear, is like this presentation and these calculations are for today, showing that we have 33 commissioned officers, but to function for what's happening today, it should be 41. And so the timeline to even get to the 41 is by the time we actually get there, then it could be even more, right? I see Chief unmuting.
Yeah, I think you hit on a great point, and that is based on the model. Because once we decide on the model, then we can start applying it as we continue to move forward. And you're going to hear in the end, and we're trying to avoid this up front, in the end, we're looking at 41 right now is where we should be. That's 8 officers. That is a huge cost. If we start going above and beyond where we think we're going to be in 5 years, that's going to scare a lot of people. And so we're trying to keep it realistic and keep it to a service level. The ultimate decision is going to come down to what level of service can we provide.
Thank you, Chief. And I think the challenge as well, you hear in a lot of news reports of other jurisdictions, this is not just unique to Tumwater, right? With the culture, with the challenges, with legislation, and the time, right? So a lot of people just think, oh, just hire more people, right? This police and fire are not just like any other staff for our city, right? And so the timeline, I know you're, projecting it out, but I have heard in our budget, this last budget, the struggle of even identifying and being competitive with other jurisdictions because of, right? So it's so layered and so complex. I know we don't have to make it complicated, but it's easy to feel like we're always behind. We're always behind. And so I appreciate this report. And I really appreciate Peter and Angela and their questions, because we have to take this back to council to say, how do we plan forward just to meet our needs today, knowing that this is going to be an ongoing conversation? So thank you both, Doctor and Chief.
I think that's absolutely kind of the point of this is, again, this is where we kind of should be today. And while this does take into account factors moving forwards and anticipated growth and everything else, we can't take into account everything, because this is just looking at, as of like right now, the calls we're dealing with, the workloads right now, this is where we're at. And I literally have this thing, ready on the next slide, but this is a proactive approach. Yes.
Just really quick, one of the things I probably should have clarified up front, when we sent him out on this task, there was no expectation of what that number was going to be. Because we've never used a model, and getting back to what Councilmember Jefferson asked, we asked, where should we be? Is our staffing adequate, or do we need more? So he was not sent out with the, hey, go get us more staffing. We wanted to know from a research basis, where should we be? What is a model we should be using? And so that's where it was. So go ahead, Dr. Bowers.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredibly important point, because the focus of this was to analyze and evaluate the staffing needs of the city as they were, which is why the data used, all the data was current and contemporary and looking historically, mapping out the future as well, but it was current. So it wasn't about like, well, we want more officers, let's, build a model to do that. It was, how many officers should we have to staff the department right now, which is, that's where we get into this strategic planning component, because this is about being proactive. And as we're all aware, the hiring complexities, so the success rates of officers, actually onboarding them, how long it takes to get an officer out on the road being a fully functioning, police officer serving the city is a huge process. And in the midst of that, we have officer attrition due to things like retirement. We have increasing demands for service in the city. The city is increasing, size, population, new housing. This is about, long-term planning. And if we're not where we should be already, then as the city grows, which it is doing, and the department has to grow with it, if we're already on the back foot now, this is really about, we don't just want to be playing catch up, because that goes against, the philosophy of the city, the philosophy of the police department, but also this, what we want to do in terms of, serving the community. So final part. So these are kind of the last bits that I have just to kind of address some components of the model, which I think were important to go through, especially when I was building it. But supervision is incredibly important under the best of circumstances to ensure that the officers have the guidance they need and they're performing at the highest level. But staffing levels have to be high enough to allow supervisors to actively supervise. And that's where we hit these issues with the staffing levels as they currently are, is officers have to be moved around and sacrifices have to be made in order to maintain our minimum staffing. But the foundation of this model is this concept of community policing, which I think is incredibly important, especially the way the city expects their police department to be, and how Tumwater as a city is, just the way we operate. But with this kind of modeling, community policing becomes that cornerstone. So it allows the department with that 66% proactive time buffer. This is about forming community partnerships, these collaborative relationships between the police and the people they serve, developing solutions to problems without, becoming criminal. This is kind of like with code enforcement. It's, can these issues be dealt with before they become a criminal component? Like, are we just going to have crime, sneaking up on us, or can we actually address these underlying causes? But by, being actively engaged in the community, increasing that trust relationship with the police, when officers have more time to do that, everyone benefits. However, obviously this requires this level of organizational transformation, which is the alignment of, management structure, personnel, the systems behind it, even, the council, all of us together on that same page of, realistically for all of you, what type of police department do you want to have? How do you want them to police this city? And that's a big component of this, because ostensibly you could just have a purely reactive police department based on, per capita numbers. You could have, 22 officers in this department and they do nothing but respond to calls, nothing proactive, nothing engagement. But that's so inherently problematic, and that's not what Tumwater is about. And this is where we get into problem solving. This is engaging, being proactive, this systematic evaluation of problems so that we can, deal with things. But you need the officers that are able to do it, which means you need enough officers to be able to go actively out into the community and take care of things. So this isn't just about what the city and the department needs today. I mean, that is literally the foundation of it, but it's where we want the city to be moving forward and in the future and in 5 years' time. Practically, this is more officer coverage for public and officer safety. This is about accountability for the department, appropriately staffed, as it should be, maximizing the resource usage, which is incredibly important, but also making sure that the department is fully prepared for all circumstances. And ultimately, more commissioned officers, allow for more community policing and a higher percentage of discretionary time. But this is just about, supporting the community as much as possible instead of doing the bare minimum, because that's all we can ostensibly do. And we know that Tumwater is a growing city, annexation, population expansion. It is imperative that, the staffing of the police department is focused on this long-term growth, not just short-term supply and demand, because the immediate needs of the department are now very apparent, but we all can see where the city is going And we have to be able to account to that. So yeah, so that is that for me.
Angela and Peter, do you have additional questions for Dr. Bowers?
Well,
Or thoughts on what he just presented?
I
Yeah.
hear about the assumption, and I hear about what we need to do. But it is my belief that if you are going to make assumption about community policing, we need to be able to have a ballpark figure of how many officers to a certain number of the population. And then what are the nature of activities that the officers have to respond to. So if we start from that simple basic premise, we ought to be able to say, okay, we need X numbers of officers going forward. If we just say, okay, well, they go out, they do this, they do that, we're always going to be behind. We're always going to need officers. That does not get us from A to B. We need a proper way that say, okay, we would need, within the next 10 years, we would need this X number of officers, and this is why.
I agree with what you're saying, Councilmember Agabi, and that's why we're here today. Because what we have to do first is start with a model and agree on a model, and then we can start projecting in the future. We're able to come up with what we need today. Once we, as a unit, and I mean unit by the whole city and the council, agree this is a model we want to move forward, then we can start projecting into the future years.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Angela?
Yes, quick review of my notes. So from what I understand, the population to model staffing is not ideal. And the workload approach is best because it's built for Tumwater. Am I tracking?
Yep.
Okay, so it talks about what our daily average is and how long it takes our average calls. For now, we are at 33 and it should be 41 officers. So I'm tracking 8 to be ideal and now. So my question is, are we rapidly moving to a reactive phase?
You want me to answer?
Your opinion, are we rapidly moving from a proactive to a reactive phase of policing?
The simple answer is yes. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, but the simple answer is yes. And I would say the biggest component of that has been the police reform legislation, and Dr. Bowers hit on it. You know, the easiest way to give you an example is, 3 years ago, if we had 3 officers on a scene, our supervisors are asking, why do we have 3 officers on a scene? Clear them, get 1 or 2 out of there and let the one handle it. Now it's completely flipped. Our supervisors are wondering why we don't have 3 officers on the scene because of the complexities and the requirements from the police reform legislation. And so with that, as Dr. Bowers said, it increases our time on the calls and diminishes our ability to be proactive in the community.
Okay, so another question for our 33 officers. What would you say the average daily rate for 33 to be at work? Is it, with leaves and passes and sick? Would you say what will be our average daily rate?
Dr. Bowers?
28 to 29. And that I ran the data for that for about 3 months, kind of contemporary, just to see how it played out. And I mean, departmental components change all the time, but having officers who have been injured, who are on light duty, having, switches in roles and whatnot meant that on any given day, we were down about 5 officers. Now, that doesn't ever sacrifice, appropriate supervision and cover anything, because the department shifts people where they need to be, and there's always that sufficient coverage. However, as the chief mentioned, it just inhibits their ability to do more than what is literally required.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Commander Mason, did you have something?
No, not to that. No, I was just, no, not at this point.
So what are our next steps with this? It's been presented to Public Health and Safety. What's next on the timeline?
John, I think this is where you come in.
It is. Thank you very much. Let me pick up.
And thank
Sarah.
you, Dr. Bowers, for that presentation.
Yeah, I would echo that. A huge thank you, because I think a lot of organizations move quickly to, here's a ratio and that's what we need, and sort of work off of that, when the reality is policing is much more complicated, and people's relationship with policing is more complicated. And so my goal is to take what's already been presented and make it even more complicated, and then sort of offer a path out, because this is great information, and I think this is a significant component of a conversation about the future of policing and how we make that happen. But there's other things that sort of need to play into it. And so my hope is to give you sort of some flavor of other things we need to talk about, other than just a model for staffing, because it is more complicated. So, we talked about it right here at the very end. Dr. Bowers talked about, and it shows up actually in your council packet on page 9 of the staffing report. It shows a graph that shows, how many officers over the course of a year are on sick leave and light duty and unavailable for field work. And you think, out of 33 officers at any, in the course of the past year, actually in the course of 2021, that was 5 of them who were unavailable to be a part of the call matrix. Now, some of those are doing light duty, and we'd like to think that doing light duty is doing work that needs to get done, but they're not available to respond to calls. And so, I think one of the things we have to talk through and figure out how to deal with is the hiring time, the injuries, the leave, the training time, all those kinds of things, to reduce the impacts to overall staffing. For those who haven't heard it, from the time there's a vacancy to the time we can hire, send someone through the academy, and have them finish FTO is about 2 years. And it's been on the high end of that more recently, just because of the challenges with the hiring times and getting people into academies and things like that. But, our sort of wallet number is 2 years in order to bring an officer on board ready to go be a police officer. There was a question about have we had any staffing model up to this point? The only one I can sort of refer to is that when we did the 2016 annexation, what we did we talked about adding 5 officers. What we did is we said, what's the current staffing level? And let's do no harm. Let's maintain that same staffing level as we added 3,000 people or something to the city. And so that's how we got to those 5. Obviously, as the population continued to grow, that ratio began to fall apart. Since 2010, I think this is another aspect for us to think about. Since 2010, the department's added 2 pretty high-level administrative positions to support officers. Dr. Bowers is one of them. Laura's the other position in terms of having an administrative manager. Prior to that civilian position, it was a police lieutenant who did things like scheduling and buying and things like that. And, it's a much more economical choice for the city to have a civilian do that than a police officer do it. And it's better for the community, because then we're not taking away police officer capacity from the community to figure out the schedule. Similarly, there's been some conversation about things like crisis response, like not only from a staffing standpoint, but a service to the community standpoint. You know, are there other civilian folks who could be in this mix of community safety response, like Olympia's model around crisis response? Okay, so that if you have people who are in mental health crisis, is sending a police officer the right person to send, or should we have someone else available to do that? You know, probably provides better service to the community and frees up officers. Some other things to think about are really just what's the future of policing. You know, I think the chief and Dr. Bowers have mentioned it. You know, it's changed and no doubt will continue to change. I think the state as a whole is in the midst of a conversation and maybe even an experiment to sort of see, you know, when is it okay to pursue? When is it not okay to pursue? What are the ramifications of certain rules around pursuit? And are the communities okay with that? And how does that play out? You know, I don't know that the requirements, limitations, whatever on police agencies are the same today as they'll be 5 years from now. So, you know, training requirements, limitations on response, retail theft, all those kinds of things are topics everyone's talking about today. Ultimately, and some of you have heard me talk about this in the context of the fire department, but the same thing applies here, is whatever we do with staffing, how does it benefit the lady in the greenhouse? And that's sort of a reference to the house across the street. Okay, I don't know who lives there, but you know, for the sake of the metaphor, there's someone who lives there who pays her taxes and goes about her business. How does this benefit her? There's lots of things we can spend money on, lots of things we can do, but ultimately, how does it benefit that particular person? And you know, I'll get to it a little bit later, but you know, this relationship with the community is really important. Police funding measures. I mean, I think we can all think about our budget process that we went through. There's really not an option in this story to do the kind of staffing increase we've talked about without some additional funding resources. Okay, and police are interesting. You know, you think about the general fund over the past 15 or 20 years, the legislature has authorized us to do single purpose revenue sources for parks. We have single purpose revenue sources for streets. We have single purpose revenue sources for fire. So those aside from police, those are the other three big expenditures in the general fund. There is no independent funding authority for police. And so that's part of our challenge, is that this is back into the general fund and you're looking at things like levy lid lifts in order to be able to fund it. And those, frankly, for police funding measures have a mixed track record with the public. They're not high on the list of, you know, probable support. The community's relationship with law enforcement is complicated. It's sort of like when we want them, we want them. But then when we don't, we don't. And when we want them, we usually want them really bad. And usually when you're calling the police, it's usually a pretty bad day in your life. So, you know, you've done something bad, someone's done something bad to you, you got in a car accident, something like that. And some of that's very call driven. Some of that's, I need someone now. Or, you know, if I wake up in the morning and someone stole the rhododendron out of my yard, I don't necessarily need a police officer right now. In fact, what we've learned over the past few years when we did online reporting, some people are just fine turning in a report. And, you know, it's good to have that data. We can use that data to look for trends, but we don't necessarily have to send an officer out to, you know, gather the information about the rhododendron. I would add and highlight that the 2023-24 budget does include one additional officer who's a sergeant. That's a full-time permanent position. So that takes our number from 33 to 34. It also added to, and this was specifically to address the transition and hiring challenges that people retire and then it takes, it's great if people retire and they announce like 4 years in advance. Okay. But people don't do that. Speaking from personal experience, people may give you some landing room, but it's usually not enough to hire, train, FTO, academy, all those kinds of things. And so what this also added was to what I called replacement officers. And this was the beginning, I would hope, of a process of having positions like this that are available in anticipation of people who are retiring. So really what this envisioned was 2 officers who are, say Officer A and Officer B are going to retire in the beginning of 2025. We have 2023 and 24 to bring their replacements on board so that when A and B leave, these 2 who we've hired have been hired, been through the academy, been through FTO, and are ready to rock and roll on the streets. And whether that program continues beyond the 2 years, that'd be great. That's far, but we're only budgeted for 2 years, so I can't budget things for 2025. But I think there are other communities who are recognizing those challenges with bringing on replacement officers, and that is a way to do that. We are also fully equipping those officers, so they're equipped as if they're not using the scraps. They're getting new cars, they're getting new equipment, new everything, so that they're ready to go, and that equipment could be available for the next replacement officers. The budget also calls for, and the council goals call for, some sort of police master planning, which is really about the conversation with the community, engaging with the community about what does it mean to be a safe community, and we have some influence over that. The police department has some influence over that. There are other influences, what happens in the courts, what happens in prosecution, even community communication. I mean, we think about things like, and I'm not critiquing anything, but we think about sort of the impact of things like the Thurston scanner, which makes readily available sort of an overview of what police criminal activity is happening in the community. Okay, that influences community safety. If I'm constantly reading articles about theft from a store in Olympia, I'm pretty sure that's happening in Tumwater. It must be happening in Tumwater. It must be happening out of control, and it just begins to paint a picture for the community. And lastly, and we got to this, is really the cost. The costs in the police department are essentially people driven. The more officers you have, the more equipment you have, the more space you need, the more people you send to jail, the more people you send to court, the more people who need public defenders, the more people who need prosecutors. All of those are really a function of the number of officers. And I refer to that jail court cost as sort of being the downstream costs. So like everything, it comes back to what's the level of service that the city can afford? How many officers, if that's reflected in response time, then what is the city willing to pay for? What's the community willing to pay for? So I think that is it. That's all I could leave you with. I think those are all questions. I would entertain any questions you have of what I've put out there. Those can be directed to me, to the chief, to Dr. Bowers.
Angela, Peter, do you have any questions for John?
I don't have a question for John.
Thank you, both of you. So John, my question is, all these questions, right? Do we do like a work session to present this to the rest of our council mates? Right, so our budget is set, but is there talk of if a ballot measure in April passes and the budget has to be amended or not, or changes made, where does this fit in the timeline of the beginning of this year? Is it just moving forward those 3, the +1 and the +2 and the additional officer?
Well, at the moment, you have the 1 and the +2, or whatever we call those. Yeah, I mean, that's what you have. I really believe, I think the next thing that has to happen is you have to see how the RFA election plays out.
Right.
Do we go this way or that way? And that creates some opportunities, but really those are about funding. And like the chief said at the very beginning, I think we have to be careful that we not get too far ahead of ourselves, because I think we need to be able to have a cogent and convincing conversation with the community about, we've listened to you, we heard this from you. Here's the strategy moving forward, because I'm going to go back to the ballot measure. Without a really good strategy, we're doomed. Okay, so this has to be a community conversation about, here's what you wanted, here's how we can deliver it, here's how much it costs, and we need your support to get that.
Right. I think we're moving in that direction with regards to the community survey that was done last year and the feedback we got from that. So that's a good indicator, right? That temperature check.
Yep.
And
Yep,
then
that's
if
a data
we,
point.
sorry, John.
I'm just saying that's a data point.
Right. And then thinking if we are able to do, like we have in the past, the community summit, maybe this could be an element of discussion or presentation, or, a heads up, this is what we're seeing, this is where we potentially might go, and then to get that feedback as well from our community. So I think we have a lot of things that we could do, but it all really depends on if the regional fire authority passes in April for me, right? Any
Yeah.
adjustments that way.
I would say that, whether the RFA passes or doesn't pass really has more to do with what the tools are at the end of the process.
Agreed.
I think you could start a conversation with the community now. You could do it at Tumwater University. You could use the community summit. You could create a separate workshop that's just, or a series of workshops on community safety. You could have those with the business community. You could have them and just hear from people. What are the challenges that people have? What's their expectation? Just pure dialogue with folks.
I mean, I would like to do that. We've had discussions in the past on this committee with Peter and Angela, but also with past members regarding community outreach, community wellness. What does that look like in our community? We've had multiple conversations of that and not even having it defined. So I would like to pursue that or study that or see what that would look like of that engagement piece in the community, because it's imperative that we have that.
I agree. And we need to start that conversation, just to let them know the challenges now. So I definitely agree with that. Those workshops and, getting with the business owners, and for sure.
So my question for the committee members, are you comfortable with the model as it is right now? Obviously, it's going to need to be massaged and changed as we get further input, but are you comfortable with the model and the approach today?
With what was presented by Dr. Rivers, and I'm just going to go over again, the elements that were included: calls for service, average time for officer involvement, and what is CFS again?
Calls for service.
Thank you. Multipliers and complicating factors, minimum thresholds were used, proactive policing time buffer, accounting for time off, training, vacation, etc. And knowing that it takes 2.2 officers for staff to staff one patrol element for 365 days coverage. All that included, I am comfortable with what was presented now, and then asking Dr. Bowers to continue working on that and developing that. I think that's an amazing start.
Great.
Yes. Yes, the information was sobering. And then again, we need to start sharing it with the community. It was a good briefing. I learned a lot, and proactive versus reactive. That's all I'm gonna say.
Angela, Peter, do you feel comfortable moving forward or having Dr. Bowers continue to, as my scientific term, Dr. Bowers is zhuzh his modeling? So
Yes, but I would like more emphasis on the ratio between the number of officers to certain segment of the population, because that's the driver of what we're getting at.
Peter, it's going back, so you're talking about the per capita, which we've talked about, we aren't using as a model.
So my back of the envelope mathematical modeling shows me or tells me that for every 638 Tumwater resident, there is one officer, and that is clearly inadequate. And that is based upon the population trending at 31,000 in 2025. And it doesn't always follow along this line. There are times you have the curve goes up and it just kind of stays flat. So assuming we have 10,000 moving forward, we're going to need a whole lot more officers.
Right, I hear you. And I think what they had identified is that this is just for today, as of today, and we haven't done any future modeling because we need to address today and get the input from us. So I hear you. So we'll continue this conversation.
Today was yesterday. Today was yesterday. Today is
Today
tomorrow.
is today. Today's today, Peter Agabe.
This,
I can only do one day at a time.
can I respond to that?
Go ahead, Chief.
You're absolutely right, Councilmember Gabi. But what we're saying is we need to agree on the model today so we can project for what you're asking for the future. And that is part of it, but we've got to settle on the model.
Yeah, I'm saying that I like the model because it has a lot of the component that shows that there's a need and we're going forward. But I just want the model to account for all the nuances of why we need more. So that if I'm telling you the story, say, well, what about ABC? We need to cover all of our bases. That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Great point, Peter. Noted and included in Dr. Bauer's continued judging of his modeling.
And I would just emphasize, and both the chief and Dr. Bowers have talked about this, but it is this whole reactive versus proactive policing. And we have had a style in most smaller communities. There's a transition that happens from a small community, which has a proactive police force, think sort of Mayberry kind of a thing, strolling down the sidewalk, okay, to an urban police department. And we have hired some officers out of very urban police departments whose work, for the most part, consisted of being entirely call driven. Okay. And they struggle here because we ask an officer to do, as Dr. Bauer said, everything from A to Z. You respond to the call, you interview folks, you investigate, you do follow up. Many urban police departments don't do that. There are officers who simply respond to calls, and they show up at work at whatever their shift starts with a list of 14 calls that are already waiting for them. Okay, obviously not urgent, but they work their way through the list of 14 and maybe they get 12 of them done. 16 more come in and they hand off 18 to the next person. Okay, that's not a style of policing that's been either provided in Tumwater or satisfactory in Tumwater. And so the asterisks in all of these stories about whichever model and how it relates to number of people or Dr. Bauer's model or whatever is to maintain our desired level of service. Again, you can turn it up, you can turn it down. You can have more proactive. I think the model talks about 40 to 60% doing proactive of their time doing proactive work. That's awesome. You could make that 80% of the time, or you could make it 0% of the time. And obviously some communities make it 0. Or they hire other people who are doing community outreach and things like that. So you dissect the work significantly. We don't think that's good for our officers. It's not good for the community. That when the rhododendron gets stolen, you have 4 different people who interact with you. Yeah, we don't need to do that.
Thank you. Anything else from anyone else?
Mander, do you have something?
I was just going to add, kind of finish what John was talking about. Doc Bowers and the chief laid out to you kind of the nuts and bolts of how a police department operates. It's numbers and people. But the other piece too, and John really hit on it, and this is, what we're asking of council is, what kind of a police department do you want to have? What kind of expectations do you have of us and the model you would like to see us? And we will try to fill in the subjective measures that are there. I'm excited about this discussion. Councilmember Jefferson asked us, what kind of a model do we use in the past? And John hit on it. It's really needs and budget. How much do we have? What are our needs? And we make do with what we have. And we have an amazing police department that way. But I'm excited about this discussion. Councilmember Jefferson and I were at a luncheon, and they talked about retail theft and some of the challenges. And we're growing, and we have, can we get ahead of some of this? Can we, build up these relationships now and these service models now, so that we can provide these opportunities for our business community, for our residential community, for our multifamily communities, and our nonprofits to grow. Can we partner with them now versus just the reactive model of meeting someone on their worst day? And I think that's the discussion I'm most excited to have with you is, what kind of a police department do you want to have, and build a plan to how to get there. And I think we're there in many ways, but also where do you want to go? And I'm super excited for that.
My final question. So when are we going to have this conversation again? So we can, know about the community summit and, feedback.
So thank you, Angela, along with that, that was going to be my question is, I would like to figure out a time where this could be presented to all of our seatmates at a work session to get these questions going in our mind, in our fellow council members.
Can I suggest that maybe the chief and I and some of our engagement folks just come up with sort of a concept of what a community conversation could look like, and then take this information and that to the full council to have that conversation. And I think this was great dialogue to have at the committee. I worry a little bit about the sort of wide openness of this being presented to the full council.
Yeah,
I think
agreed, John.
Yes,
Yep.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yep,
I
that
agree.
makes sense.
Okay. Anything else before I adjourn this meeting? Seeing everyone say wave goodbye. Thank you so much. Meeting adjourned at 9:27.
You guys have a great day.
You too, Peter.